The morning mist clung to the rolling hills of Meadowbrook Valley like a secret waiting to be whispered. Ranch owner Marcus Caldwell had seen plenty of unexpected things in his 43 years of working the land, but nothing could have prepared him for what he discovered that crisp October morning beside his prize stallion, Thunder. Before we jump back in, tell us where you're tuning in from, and if this story touches you, make sure you're subscribed because tomorrow I've saved something extra special for you. A woman lay curled against the horse's warm flank, her clothes torn and muddy, her dark hair matted with leaves and debris. She was breathing, but barely conscious, and clutched in her trembling hand was a leather pouch that would unravel mysteries dating back decades and shake the very foundation of their quiet town. What Marcus found inside that pouch, and the woman's true identity, would expose secrets that powerful people had killed to protect. Marcus Caldwell's boots crunched through the frost-covered grass as he made his way toward the pasture behind his ranch house. The sun hadn't yet crested the mountains that bordered Meadowbrook Valley, and the world existed in that peculiar gray light that comes just before dawn. He'd been making this same walk for over 20 years, ever since he'd inherited the Caldwell Ranch from his father, and the routine had become as natural as breathing. Thunder, his black stallion, usually greeted him at the fence line with an eager whinny and impatient stamping. The horse had been with Marcus for 8 years now, a gift from his late wife Sarah before the cancer took her. Thunder was more than livestock, he was family, the last tangible connection Marcus had to the woman who'd made the ranch feel like home instead of just property. But this morning, Thunder wasn't at the fence. Marcus squinted through the lingering mist, scanning the 20-acre pasture. The horse stood motionless near the old oak tree at the far end, his head lowered in an unusual posture. Something wasn't right. Thunder was a spirited animal, always moving, always alert. This stillness sent a chill down Marcus's spine that had nothing to do with the October morning. He quickened his pace, his weathered hands gripping the top rail as he climbed over the wooden fence. The grass was slick with dew, and his boots slipped slightly as he jogged across the uneven ground. As he drew closer, he could see Thunder's ears swiveling nervously, and the horse's dark eyes fixed on something at the base of the oak tree. That's when Marcus saw her. A woman lay crumpled against Thunder's legs, her body curved into the horse's warmth. She wore what had once been a white blouse, now torn and stained with dirt, and something that looked disturbingly like blood. Her jeans were ripped at the knees, and one of her shoes was missing entirely. Dark brown hair fell across her face, hiding her features, but Marcus could see the gentle rise and fall of her chest. She was alive. Marcus approached slowly, not wanting to spook Thunder, who had clearly been standing guard over this mysterious woman. The stallion's protective instincts had kicked in, and Marcus felt a surge of pride mixed with bewilderment. How long had Thunder been standing sentinel over this stranger? "Easy, boy," Marcus murmured, extending his hand toward Thunder's muzzle. The horse nickered softly, a sound that seemed to convey both relief at Marcus's arrival and concern for the woman at his feet. Marcus knelt beside the woman, careful not to startle her. Up close, he could see she was probably in her 30s, with olive skin and delicate features that spoke of intelligence and strength. There was something familiar about her face, though he couldn't place where he might have seen her before. Meadowbrook Valley was a small town, population barely pushing 3,000, and Marcus knew most of the locals by sight, if not by name. But this woman was a stranger. She stirred as Marcus's shadow fell across her, her eyelids fluttering. She mumbled something incoherent, her voice hoarse and strained. Marcus noticed her right hand was clenched into a tight fist, clutching something against her chest with desperate determination, even in her unconscious state. "Ma'am," Marcus said gently. "Ma'am, can you hear me?" Her eyes opened slowly, unfocused and clouded with confusion. They were a striking green, the color of spring grass after rain. When she tried to speak, only a cracked whisper emerged. "Water," she managed. Marcus glanced back toward his ranch house, calculating the distance. It would take him 10 minutes to get there and back, but he wasn't comfortable leaving her alone, even with Thunder standing guard. Instead, he pulled out his cell phone, grateful that he'd finally upgraded to one of those smartphones his nephew Jake had insisted he needed. "I'm calling an ambulance," he told her. "You need medical attention." The effect of his words was immediate and alarming. The woman's eyes went wide with panic, and she struggled to sit up, her movements frantic despite her obvious. Preparing and narrating this story took us a lot of time, so if you are enjoying it, subscribe to our channel. It means a lot to us. Now back to the story. Elena nodded, seeming to accept the truth of that statement. Slowly, carefully, she opened. Her right hand dot in her palm lay a leather pouch, no bigger than a cigarette pack, worn smooth by years of handling. The leather was expensive, the kind used for luxury goods, and it was secured with a thin cord that had been tied in an intricate knot. "This belonged to my grandfather," Elena said, her voice barely above a whisper. "He gave it to me before he died, told me to keep it safe, never let anyone else see it. I thought it was just sentimental value, maybe some old family photos or documents." She began working at the knot with trembling fingers. "But 3 days ago, I finally opened it. And what I found inside explains why my grandfather died in that car accident when I was 12. Why my father disappeared when I was 18. Why have I been running for my life ever since Tuesday?" The knot came free, and Elena opened the pouch. With the reverence usually reserved for sacred objects, she tilted it toward Marcus, and several items spilled onto the kitchen table. First came a stack of photographs, black and white, clearly taken decades ago. Marcus could make out what appeared to be a large building, possibly industrial, with several men in suits standing in front of it. But it was too dim in the kitchen to make out details. Next came a small key, brass and ornate, the kind that might fit an old safe or lockbox. Finally, Elena extracted a folded piece of paper, yellowed with age but still intact. She unfolded it carefully, revealing what appeared to be a hand-drawn map, complete with landmarks and notations in Spanish. "My grandfather worked for the Meadowbrook Mining Company back in the 1960s, Elena said, her voice gaining strength as she began her story. "He was just a laborer, but he was smart, observant. And he saw things he wasn't supposed to see." Marcus felt his blood turn cold. The Meadowbrook Mining Company had been the economic heart of their valley for over 50 years before it closed. In the 1980s, the mine had employed nearly half the town's population at its peak, and its closure had devastated the local economy. Many families had never recovered, but more importantly, the mine had been owned by the Whitmore family, the same family that still controlled most of the business and political interests in Meadowbrook Valley. Judge Harrison Whitmore sat on the county court. His brother David owned the largest bank in town. Their cousin Patricia was the mayor. The Whitmores were untouchable in Meadowbrook Valley. They were also, Marcus was beginning to realize, probably the people Elena was running from. "What kind of things did your grandfather see?" Marcus asked. Though he suspected he already knew the answer would change everything. Elena's green eyes met his across the kitchen table, and in them, Marcus saw decades of buried secrets about to surface. He saw them dumping bodies in the mine shafts, she said quietly. Dozens of them. People who asked too many questions about where the gold really came from, and where all that money was really going. Outside, thunder whinnied softly, as if he sensed that the morning's revelations were just beginning. Marcus stared at the photographs spread across his kitchen table, his coffee growing cold in the morning silence. The black and white images showed a world he'd never known existed beneath the surface of his quiet valley town. Elena sat across from him, watching his face as the implications of what she'd revealed began to sink in. The first photograph showed the entrance to Whitmore. Mine, but not as Marcus remembered it from his childhood visits. This version was bustling with activity, trucks, men in expensive suits. and what appeared to be construction equipment, positioned around several of the deeper shaft entrances. In the background, barely visible, were shapes that made Marcus's stomach turn. Canvas-wrapped bundles being lowered into the darkness. "When was this taken?" Marcus asked, his voice hoarse. Based on the date stamp my grandfather wrote on the back, September 1967. Elena turned the photograph over, revealing spidery handwriting in faded ink. 3 months before the first of the mining accidents that killed 17 workers. Marcus picked up the second photograph. This one showed a group of men standing outside what he recognized as the Meadowbrook First National Bank, David Whitmore's bank. But the building looked different, newer, and the sign above the door read The brass key lay gleaming in the morning sunlight, streaming through the kitchen window. Marcus picked it up, feeling its weight in his palm. "And this opens what exactly?" "According to my grandfather's notes, there's a safety deposit box at the old Consolidated Mining Trust building, what's now David Whitmore's bank. Box number 247. My grandfather managed to make copies of everything before the company restructured, and he hid the duplicates in that box." Marcus felt a chill run down his spine. "Elena, if what you're saying is true, if this evidence really exists, why are you still alive? Why haven't they killed you already?" "Because they didn't know I had this." She gestured to the contents of the leather pouch. "My grandfather was smart. He told everyone in the family that he'd left me some keepsakes, but he never specified what. When he died, I was just a 12-year-old kid who inherited what looked like worthless junk. The Whitmores probably forgot about it entirely. So what changed? What made them come after you now?" Elena's expression darkened. 3 days ago, I made the mistake of going to the police." Marcus felt his blood run cold. "You went to the police? Here in Meadowbrook?" "No, I live in Denver now. I've been there for 15 years, trying to build a normal life, trying to forget about all the family stories I thought were just paranoid fantasies." She rubbed her temples, as if fighting off a headache. "But I kept thinking about my father, about how he disappeared without a trace when I was 18. I kept wondering if maybe there was truth to the things my grandfather used to whisper about." She stood up and walked to the kitchen window, staring out at the pasture where thunder grazed peacefully. "So I opened the pouch, and when I saw what was inside, I knew I had to do something. I couldn't just let all those murders go unpunished." "What did you tell the Denver police?" "Everything. I showed them the photographs, the map, the key. I told them about the Whitmores and the mining operation and the bodies in the shafts." Elena's reflection in the window looked haunted. The detective I spoke with seemed genuinely interested. He said they'd look into it, maybe coordinate with federal authorities since it involved interstate money laundering. Marcus was beginning to see where this story was heading, and he didn't like it. But they didn't investigate. 12 hours later, 3 men broke into my apartment. Professional men, Marcus. They moved like soldiers, knew exactly what they were looking for. If I hadn't been working late at the diner that night, they would have found me. She turned back to face him, and Marcus saw steel in her green eyes that hadn't been there before. "I came home to my apartment torn apart, and my neighbors telling me that federal agents had been asking questions about me. Federal agents who had no identification and drove unmarked black SUVs with Colorado plates. How did you get away?" I grabbed my emergency bag. I always keep cash and basic supplies ready, a habit my grandfather taught me, and I ran. But I knew they'd be watching the airports, the bus stations, anywhere someone might logically go to disappear. Elena managed a weak smile. "So I stole a car." "You stole a car?" "Borrowed. I fully intend to return it once this is over." She gestured toward the window. "It's parked about 2 miles from here, hidden in a grove of trees near the old highway. I've been hiking through the back country for 2 days, trying to make my way here without being spotted." Marcus stood up and joined her at the window. "Why come back here?" If you know the Whitmores control this town, why walk right into their territory? Because the evidence my grandfather hid is still here. The safety deposit box, the chamber marked on the map, it's all here in Meadowbrook Valley. If I'm going to expose what they did, if I'm going to get justice for my family, and all those other victims, I need that evidence. She pointed toward the distant mountains that bordered the valley. And because running isn't working. They found me in Denver, which means they have resources I can't match. My only chance is to go on the offensive. Marcus studied Alana's profile as she stared out at the pastoral scene beyond his kitchen window. There was something else, something she wasn't telling him. There's more to this story, isn't there? Alana was quiet for a long moment. When she spoke, her voice was barely above a whisper. My father didn't just disappear, Marcus. Before he vanished, he was investigating the same things my grandfather had documented. He'd been trying to build a case, gathering additional evidence, talking to other families who'd lost people to the Whitmores. She pulled a folded piece of paper from her pocket, modern notebook paper, not the aged document from her grandfather's collection. This is the last letter he wrote to me. It arrived 3 days after he disappeared. Marcus took the letter, noting how Elena's hands trembled as she released it. The handwriting was bold and confident. The words of a man who knew he was in danger but refused to back down. Elena, my brave girl, if you're reading this, then the worst has happened and I won't be coming home. I want you to know that everything your grandfather told you about the Whitmores and the mine was true. I have proof now, not just the old photographs and maps, but new evidence that ties the current generation to ongoing criminal activities. They're still using the old network, still moving money and eliminating threats. Judge Whitmore signed the death certificates for 17 people who never actually died. They were murdered and their deaths covered up. Sheriff Kane's son is now State Police Captain Kane, and he's been helping to coordinate cover-ups that span multiple counties. I've hidden copies of everything in a place only you will be able to find. Remember the story I used to tell you about the princess and the dragon? The princess hid her treasure in the dragon's lair, where only someone with her blood could retrieve it. You'll understand what I mean when the time comes. Trust no one in authority, Elena. This corruption goes deeper than you can imagine. But don't let them win. Don't let our family's sacrifice be for nothing. I love you more than all the stars in the sky. Papa Marcus finished reading and looked up at Elena, who was wiping tears from her cheeks. The Princess and the Dragon? A bedtime story my father invented. When I was little, the princess was brave and clever, and she hid her most precious treasure in the dragon's cave, because dragons protect what they claim as their own. Elena's smile was sad but determined. I know exactly where he hid the evidence. Where? In Harrison Whitmore Sr.'s tomb. Marcus felt the coffee cup slip from his numb fingers, shattering against the kitchen floor in an explosion of ceramic and cold coffee. The sound seemed to echo in the sudden silence, a percussion point for the realization that it just hit him like a physical blow. You want to break into Judge Whitmore's father's grave? Not his grave, Elena corrected. His mausoleum. The Whitmore family has a private mausoleum in Meadowbrook Memorial Cemetery, the same cemetery that sits on top of some of those mine shafts. My father always said it was poetic justice that the Whitmores built their family monument on top of their victims' unmarked graves. Marcus began pacing around the small kitchen, his boots crunching on the broken ceramic. Elena, this is insane. Even if you're right about everything, even if your father really did hide evidence in the mausoleum, how would you get inside? Those things are built like fortresses. My father was a locksmith before he started investigating the Whitmores. He could get into anything. Elena picked up the brass key from the table, turning it over in her palm. And I inherited his skills along with his sense of justice. Outside, thunder whinnied softly, and both Marcus and Elena turned toward the sound. Through the kitchen window, They could see the stallion standing at attention near the pasture fence. His ears pricked forward as if he'd detected something in the distance. "Someone's coming," Alina whispered, her face going pale. Marcus squinted toward the dirt road that led to his ranch. A plume of dust was rising in the distance, kicked up by an approaching vehicle. In Meadowbrook Valley, unannounced visitors were rare, and given the morning's revelations, any visitor was potentially dangerous. "How fast can you move?" Marcus asked, already heading toward the window to get a better look at the approaching vehicle. "Fast enough." Elena was already gathering up the photographs and map, stuffing them back into the leather pouch with practice. "Efficiency. Is there a back way out of here?" Marcus nodded toward the rear of the house. "Kitchen door leads to a path through the woods. It connects to the old logging road about a mile north." He paused, studying the dust cloud. The vehicle was still too far away to identify, but it was moving fast. "Elena, I want you to know, I believe you. Everything you've told me, everything. In those photographs. It explains too much about this town that never made sense before." She looked up from securing the leather pouch, surprise flickering across her features. "You do? My wife Sarah used to work at the courthouse before we got married. She always said there were files that didn't make sense, death certificates that seemed wrong, land transfers that happened under suspicious circumstances." Marcus grabbed his jacket from the hook by the door. She tried to ask questions once, and Judge Whitmore had her transferred to a different department the next day. The sound of the approaching vehicle was getting louder now, and Marcus could make out that it was a truck, moving fast enough to be dangerous on the winding dirt road. "You need to go," Marcus said. "Now." But Alina was shaking her head. "Not without you. If they suspect you helped me, if they think you know anything, I can handle myself." That's what my father thought too. Marcus looked into Elena's eyes and saw the fear there, not for herself, but for him. In that moment, he made a decision that would irrevocably change the trajectory of his quiet rancher's life. "Then I guess we'd better go together." They slipped out the kitchen's back door just as the sound of the truck's engine began to fade. Whoever was coming had stopped, probably at the front of the house. Marcus led Elena along a narrow path that wound through a stand of pine trees, their boots silent on the carpet of fallen needles. Behind them, they could hear voices, at least 3 different men, their words indistinguishable but their tone unmistakably aggressive. Someone pounded on the front door of the ranch house, the sound echoing across the valley like gunshots. Marcus and Alina moved deeper into the woods, following a trail that Marcus had walked countless times during his childhood. But this time, instead of heading out for a peaceful morning hunt, he was fleeing for his life alongside a woman whose family secrets were about to expose the dark heart of everything he'd called home. As they reached the old logging road, Elena grabbed Marcus's arm. "There's something else you need to know," she said, breathing hard from their rapid escape. "The reason my father was so sure about the ongoing criminal activities, the reason he knew the current Whitmores were still involved." Marcus waited, though every instinct was screaming at him to keep moving. "My father discovered that the money laundering operation never actually stopped. It just evolved. The Whitmores are still cleaning money, still eliminating threats, still operating the same network they built in the 1960s. Elena's eyes were bright with unshed tears and fierce determination. And 3 months ago, they killed a journalist from Denver who was investigating connections between small-town corruption and drug money from the Mexican cartels. The pieces clicked into place in Marcus's mind with sickening clarity. That's why you really went to the police, Elena nodded. The journalist was my fiancé. The old logging road stretched ahead of them like a scar through the pine forest, rutted and overgrown from years of abandonment. Marcus and Elena moved quickly but carefully, their footsteps muffled by the thick carpet of fallen needles. Behind them, the voices at the ranch house had grown fainter, but Marcus knew it wouldn't be long before their pursuers realized no one was home and began searching the surrounding area. Elena's revelation about her murdered fiancé hung between them. Like a physical presence, Marcus wanted to ask questions, to understand the full scope of what they were up against, but he could see the pain in her eyes every time she glanced his way. Some wounds were too fresh to probe, even when lives hung in the balance. They'd been walking for 20 minutes when Elena suddenly stopped, her hand flying to her chest as if she'd been struck. "Oh God," she whispered. "Marcus, we have to go back." "What?" "Elena, we can't, the safety deposit box key." Her face had gone pale. "I dropped it when we ran. It rolled under your kitchen table." Marcus felt his stomach drop. Without that key, they had no way to access the evidence Elena's grandfather had hidden. But going back to the ranch now would be suicide. Whoever had come looking for them would certainly have the place under surveillance. "Are you sure you dropped it there?" Elena closed her eyes, retracing their frantic escape in her mind. "I was putting everything back in the pouch when we heard the truck. The key was the last thing, and when you said someone was coming, I must have fumbled it." She opened her eyes, and Marcus saw desperation there. "Without that key, we have nothing. The photographs show criminal activity, but they're 50 years old. The map proves my grandfather knew about the mine's layout, but that's not enough to convince anyone in authority." Marcus studied the forest around them, calculating distances and possibilities. "There might be another way." "What do you mean?" "My neighbor Dolores Chen lives about a mile east of here. She's been friends with my family for 30 years, and she's not exactly fond of the Whitmores." Marcus started walking again, this time angling off the logging road toward a barely visible deer path. Dolores worked as a cleaning lady at the courthouse for 25 years. If anyone knows the building's secrets, it's her. Elena followed him into the deeper woods. "You think she might know another way into that safety deposit box?" "I think Dolores knows things about this town that would curl your hair. And more. Importantly, I think she might be willing to help us." The deer path wound through dense undergrowth and across a small creek that Marcus remembered from his childhood fishing expeditions. The water was crystal clear and ice-cold, fed by mountain springs that never ran dry. Elena knelt beside the stream and cupped her hands, drinking deeply before splashing water on her face and neck. "Tell me about your fiancé," Marcus said gently. As they continued walking, Elena was quiet for so long that Marcus thought she might not answer. When she finally spoke, her voice was steady but filled with controlled grief. "Daniel Reeves. He was an investigative journalist for the Denver Post, specialized in following money trails and exposing corruption in small-town politics." She stepped over a fallen log, her movements automatic as her mind traveled back to happier times. "We met at a coffee shop near the university. I was working on my master's degree in archival science, and he was researching a story about missing historical documents from the Colorado Territory period. Sounds like you had a lot in common." "We did." Daniel loved puzzles, mysteries, the kind of stories where you had to dig through decades of carefully buried secrets to find the truth. Elena's smile was sad but genuine. "When I finally told him about my family's history, about the things my grandfather and father had claimed about the Whitmores, he didn't dismiss it as paranoid fantasy. He wanted to investigate." Marcus could see where this was heading, and that investigation got him killed. Daniel started in Denver, following financial records and shell companies. He discovered that several businesses with ties to Mexican drug cartels had been moving money through a network of small-town banks and mining operations throughout Colorado and New Mexico. Elena paused to catch her breath, leaning against a massive pine tree. The Meadowbrook connection was just one thread in a much larger web. How much larger? According to Daniel's research, the Whitmore's operation has been laundering money for organized crime for over 60 years. It evolved from hiding gold and cash for local corruption to processing millions of dollars from drug trafficking, human trafficking, and arms dealing. Elena's voice turned bitter. They're not just small-town criminals, Marcus. They're part of an interstate criminal enterprise that reaches into state governments, federal agencies, and multinational corporations. The scope of what Elena was describing made Marcus feel dizzy. He'd spent his entire life thinking of Meadowbrook Valley as a sleepy farming and ranching community, isolated from the larger world's problems. To learn that his hometown was actually a crucial node in a criminal network that spanned multiple countries was like discovering that his quiet ranch sat on top of an active volcano. How did they find out about Daniel's investigation? We think someone in law enforcement tipped them off. Daniel had been coordinating with federal agencies, sharing his findings with FBI agents, who claimed to be part of a task force investigating money laundering in rural communities. Elena pushed away from the tree and started walking again, her pace more urgent now. 3 days before he was killed, Daniel told me he thought someone in the task force was feeding information to the people they were supposed to be investigating. And then he died. Car accident on I-25, just south of Denver. Daniel was an excellent driver, Marcus. He'd driven that stretch of highway hundreds of times. But according to the police report, he fell asleep at the wheel and crashed into a concrete barrier at 80 miles per hour. Elena's hands clenched into fists. Except the autopsy showed he hadn't been sleeping, he'd been drugged. Marcus felt a chill that had nothing to do with the mountain air. The authorities covered it up. The coroner who performed the autopsy was Dr. Patricia Whitmore Stevens, Judge Whitmore's cousin. She ruled the death accidental and had Daniel's body cremated before I could request a second opinion. Elena's voice cracked slightly. They didn't just kill him, Marcus. They erased him, destroyed his research, confiscated his computer equipment, and made sure no one would ever be able to prove what really happened. Through the trees ahead, Marcus could see the distinctive red roof of Dolores Cheen's farmhouse. The elderly woman lived alone on 40 acres of organic vegetable gardens and fruit trees, selling her produce at the farmer's market in town every Saturday. Marcus had bought tomatoes and sweet corn from Dolores for years, but he'd never realized she might be a potential ally against the Whitmores. "There's something I should tell you before we talk to Dolores," Marcus said as they approached the edge of her property. "She lost her son in Vietnam, and she's never forgiven the government for lying about why we were there. If she thinks you're telling the truth about corruption in Meadowbrook, she'll move heaven and earth to help you expose it." Elena nodded. What about her connection to the courthouse? Dolores cleaned Judge Whitmore's office for over 2 decades. She also cleaned the offices of 3 previous judges, 2 sheriffs, and 4 mayors. If there are secrets hidden in that building, she probably knows where they are. They emerged from the forest into Dolores's meticulously maintained garden. The elderly woman was kneeling among rows of late-season tomatoes, her weathered hands gentle as she examined each plant for signs of disease or pest damage. She looked up as Marcus and Elena approached, her sharp eyes taking in their disheveled appearance and obvious exhaustion. "Marcus Caldwell," she said, rising slowly to her feet. "You look like you've been running from something." "In a manner of speaking, we have." Marcus gestured toward Elena. "Dolores, this is Elena Vasquez. We need your help with something that's going to sound completely insane." Dolores studied Elena with the same careful attention she'd been giving her tomatoes. "Young lady, you've got the look of someone carrying heavy burdens. Why don't you both come inside? I'll make some tea, and you can tell me what's got you running through the woods like a couple of fugitives." Dolores's kitchen was the opposite of Marcus's utilitarian space. Every surface was covered with ceramic roosters, dried herb bundles, and photographs of grandchildren who lived in distant cities. The smell of fresh bread hung in the air, and a pot of soup simmered on the old gas stove as Dolores busied herself with tea preparations. Elena began her story. She started with the leather pouch and her grandfather's photographs, but Dolores stopped her before she'd gotten through the first few sentences. "Child, I know all about the bodies in the mine shafts." Elena and Marcus stared at her in shock. Dolores continued filling the tea kettle as if she'd just commented on the weather. "You knew?" Elena managed. "Honey, I've been cleaning up after the Whitmores for 40 years. You think I never noticed when Judge Whitmore's office trash contained medical examiner reports for people who were supposedly still alive? You think I didn't wonder why the sheriff's filing cabinets were full of missing person reports that were never officially filed?" Dolores set the tea kettle on the stove and turned to face them, her expression grim. "The Whitmores have been getting away with murder for decades because everyone in this town is either on their payroll, terrified of them, or too invested in the local economy to ask uncomfortable questions. But that doesn't mean we're all blind. We?" Marcus asked. "There are more of us than you might think. People who've noticed things, lost family members under suspicious circumstances, or simply watched too many convenient accidents happen to inconvenient people." Dolores pulled 3 mismatched cups from her cabinet. "We've been waiting for someone with enough evidence and enough courage to finally expose them." Elena pulled the leather pouch from her jacket and set it on the kitchen table. "I have evidence, but I lost the key to access more." "The safety deposit box at the bank, box 247, Dolores interrupted, "at what used to be the Consolidated Mining Trust building." Elena's mouth fell open. "How did you know that?" "Because I used to clean the bank too, back when it was the mining company's headquarters. I saw your grandfather there many times, usually late at night when he thought no one else was around." Dolores smiled slightly. "Alfonso Vasquez was a good man who tried to do the right thing in impossible circumstances." "You knew my grandfather?" "I knew your whole family, child. Your grandfather helped my late husband Roberto get work at the mine when we first moved here from California. And your father ... quotes Dolores's expression darkened. "Your father was asking a lot of the same questions you're asking now, right before he disappeared." The tea kettle began to whistle, and Dolores moved to prepare the tea with movements that spoke of decades of practiced hospitality. But Marcus could see the tension in her shoulders, the way her hands trembled slightly as she poured the hot water. "Dolores," Marcus said carefully, "do you know what happened to Elena's father?" The older woman was quiet for a long moment, her back turned to them as she arranged cups on a serving tray. When she finally spoke, her voice was heavy with years of suppressed guilt. "I could have warned him. Should have warned him. But I was scared, and I thought maybe if I just kept quiet, if I just kept cleaning their offices and pretending I didn't see anything." She turned around, tears shining in her eyes. Your father came to see me 3 weeks before he disappeared. He showed me some of the same photographs you have there, asked me if I'd ever seen anything in the courthouse that might support his theories about the Whitmores. What did you tell him? Elena asked, her voice barely above a whisper. I told him the truth. About the files I'd seen, the conversations I'd overheard, the late-night meetings in Judge Whitmore's office. Dolores brought the tea tray to the table and sat down heavily. I also told him about the basement. Marcus leaned forward. What basement? The courthouse has a basement level that doesn't appear on any official blueprints. It connects to the old mining company building, what's now David Whitmore's bank, through a tunnel system that dates back to the 1960s. Dolores poured tea with steady hands despite her obvious emotional distress. I discovered it by accident one night when I was working late. Judge Whitmore had left his office door unlocked. Elena stared at the keys. You could get us into the bank? I could get you into the basement level of the bank, which is where the old Consolidated Mining Trust safe deposit boxes are still located. Most people don't even know they exist anymore. The current bank operation is entirely separate from the old mining company's financial infrastructure. Marcus felt a surge of hope mixed with terror. Dolores, if you help us with this, if the Whitmores find out ... Marcus, I'm 73 years old. I've lived my entire adult life watching evil people destroy good families in this town. I've kept silent while they were killed, and I've cleaned up their lies for 4 decades. Dolores's voice grew stronger with each word. If there's a chance to finally expose them, to get justice for all the people they've murdered, then I'm willing to take that risk. Elena reached across the table and took Dolores's weathered hand in hers. There's something else. My father told me he hid additional evidence in Harrison Whitmore Sr.'s mausoleum. If we can get into the safety deposit box in the mausoleum, we might have enough evidence to bring down their entire operation. The mausoleum, Dolores nodded slowly. That's actually brilliant. It's the one place in Meadowbrook Valley where the Whitmores would never think to look for hidden evidence, their own family shrine. Can you help us get inside? Dolores smiled for the first time since they'd arrived. Child, I've been the caretaker for Meadowbrook Memorial Cemetery for the past 5 years. I have keys to every mausoleum, crypt, and maintenance building on the grounds. As if summoned by their conversation, the sound of vehicles approaching broke the peaceful silence of the farm. Through the kitchen window, they could see 2 black SUVs turning into Dolores's driveway, their tinted windows reflecting the afternoon sunlight like dead eyes. How did they find us? Elena whispered. Dolores was already moving, her elderly frame suddenly energized by decades of suppressed defiance. Doesn't matter. What matters is that we're not giving up now. She grabbed her keys and headed toward the back door. There's a root cellar behind the house that connects to an old mining tunnel. It'll take us directly to the cemetery. As they slipped out the back door, Marcus could hear car doors slamming and harsh voices giving orders. The peaceful afternoon at Dolores's farm was over, but their real mission was just beginning. Somewhere in the underground chambers beneath Meadowbrook Valley lay evidence that could expose 60 years of murder and corruption. And for the first time since Elena had appeared beside his horse that morning, Marcus believed they might actually have a chance to find it. The root cellar beneath Dolores's farmhouse was a relic from a different era, when families needed to store vegetables and preserves through harsh mountain winters. Stone walls held back the earth, and wooden shelves lined the perimeter, still holding mason jars filled with pickled vegetables and homemade preserves. But what caught Marcus's attention was the wooden door at the far end of the cellar, partially hidden behind hanging bundles of dried herbs. This tunnel was part of the original mining operation, Dolores explained as she unlocked the heavy door with an ornate brass key. When they built my house in 1952, the construction crew discovered it and decided to incorporate it into the root cellar rather than fill it in. Previous owners used it for storage, but I've always suspected it was meant for more clandestine purposes. The tunnel beyond the door was larger than Marcus had expected, carved directly into the bedrock with precision that spoke of professional mining techniques. Electric lights had been installed at some point, though they flickered weakly and cast eerie shadows on the stone walls. The air was cool and carried the mineral scent of deep earth. Elena ran her fingers along the tunnel wall, feeling the tool. Marks left by whoever had carved this passage decades ago. My grandfather's map showed this tunnel, but I never imagined it would be so substantial. The Whitmores built an entire network under this valley, Dolores said, leading them deeper into the passage. Most people think the mining operation was just about extracting copper and silver from the mountain, but the real infrastructure was designed for moving things that couldn't be transported openly. Their footsteps echoed in the confined space as they walked, and Marcus found himself thinking about all the secrets that had traveled through this tunnel over the years. Money, documents, people, both living and dead. The weight of the mountain above them seemed to press down with the accumulated guilt of decades of hidden crimes. Dolores, Elena said quietly, when my father came to see you, did he mention anything about ongoing criminal activities? Things that were still happening, not just historical crimes? The older woman paused at a junction where the main tunnel branched into two smaller passages. She chose the left branch without hesitation, suggesting she'd traveled this route many times before. Your father was very careful about what he shared, but he did mention that he'd observed unusual activity at the bank during his visits to town. Large cash deposits from businesses that didn't seem to generate that kind of revenue, wire transfers to offshore accounts, and meetings between David Whitmore and people who definitely weren't local businessmen. Marcus's stomach tightened. How recent was this activity? This was 3 years ago when your father was investigating, but I've seen similar things since then. Dolores stopped at another heavy door, this one newer and equipped with a modern lock. I still clean the bank once a week, and David Whitmore hasn't been nearly as careful about hiding his activities as his predecessors were. She produced a different key from her collection, and the lock clicked open smoothly. Last month, I witnessed a meeting between David Whitmore, Captain Kane from the state police, and a man who introduced himself as a federal agricultural inspector. They were discussing something called seasonal livestock transfers and processing. Facility inspections. Elena and Marcus exchanged glances. You think they were talking about human trafficking? Elena asked. I think they were talking about something that required federal law enforcement cooperation and had nothing to do with actual agriculture. Dolores pushed open the door, revealing another section of tunnel that was clearly much newer. The walls were lined with concrete instead of carved stone, and modern ventilation systems hummed quietly overhead. This section was built in the 1980s, when the mining company officially closed but the Whitmore operation continued expanding, Dolores explained. It connects directly to the basement level of the bank, the courthouse, and several other buildings in town. As they walked through the modernized tunnel, Marcus began to understand the true scope of what they were up against. This wasn't just a family of corrupt local officials. The Whitmores had built a sophisticated infrastructure for criminal operations that had been expanding and evolving for decades. Elena, he said, when Daniel was investigating the money laundering network, did he find evidence of current operations in other towns? He documented similar patterns in at least 12 small towns across Colorado, New Mexico, and Wyoming. Each one had a local family or business that controlled most of the political and economic power, and each one showed the same financial irregularities. Elena's voice was grim. Daniel believed the Meadowbrook operation was actually the administrative center for the entire network. Meaning what exactly? Meaning the evidence we're looking for might not just expose the Whitmores' crimes. It might bring down a criminal organization that spans multiple states and involves hundreds of people. The tunnel began to slope upward, and Marcus could see light ahead, not the weak electric bulbs they'd been following, but natural daylight filtering down from somewhere above. They emerged into a larger chamber that had clearly been excavated more recently. Modern equipment lined the walls: computers, communication devices, and filing cabinets that looked decidedly out of place in an underground mining tunnel. "What is this place?" Marcus asked. Dolores's expression was troubled. "This chamber wasn't here the last time I came through this tunnel, which was about 6 months ago. Someone has been expanding the underground network." Elena approached one of the computer terminals. The screen was dark, but the equipment was clearly high-end and recently installed. "This looks like some kind of command center, or a backup headquarters," Marcus suggested. "Somewhere the Whitmores could operate from if their official offices were compromised." Elena tried turning on one of the computers, but it was password protected. However, scattered papers on nearby desks provided glimpses into current operations. Marcus picked up a folder labeled Transport Schedules and felt his blood run cold as he read the contents. "These aren't livestock transport schedules," he said, showing the papers to Elena and Dolores. A sound from somewhere deeper in the chamber made them all freeze. It was faint but unmistakable, the hum of an elevator motor. Someone was coming. "This way," Dolores whispered, leading them toward another tunnel entrance on the far side of the chamber. "This passage leads directly to the cemetery. We can access the mausoleum from there." They moved quickly but quietly, gathering up the most incriminating documents they could carry. Behind them, the elevator sounds grew louder, accompanied by voices that echoed through the stone chambers. The tunnel to the cemetery was older and narrower than the others, carved from solid rock with hand tools and lined with timber supports that creaked ominously as they passed. Marcus found himself wondering how many people had traveled this route over the decades, and how many of them had been making their final journey. "The mausoleum entrance is just ahead," Dolores said, her voice barely audible in the confined space. "But there's something you need to know before we go inside." She stopped at a heavy iron gate that blocked the tunnel. Beyond it, Marcus could see stone steps leading upward toward what appeared to be natural light. "What is it?" Elena asked. "Harrison Whitmore Sr.'s mausoleum isn't just a burial site. According to records I found in the courthouse basement, it was specifically designed as a secure storage facility. The burial chamber is real, but there are additional rooms that were built to house sensitive materials." Dolores unlocked the iron gate with yet another key from her collection. "If your father really did hide evidence there, he chose the one place in Meadowbrook Valley where it would be both protected and symbolically appropriate." They climbed the stone steps, emerging into the interior of what appeared to be a maintenance building. Through small windows, Marcus could see the rolling grounds of Meadowbrook Memorial Cemetery, with its neat rows of headstones and carefully maintained landscaping. "The mausoleum is about 200 yards from here," Dolores said, checking her watch. "But we need to be careful. The cemetery gets regular visitors during the day, and if anyone sees us entering the Whitmore Mausoleum... "How do we get inside without being seen?" Elena asked. "There's a service entrance on the backside, hidden by landscaping. I use it for maintenance access, so anyone who sees me there will assume I'm doing my regular caretaking duties." Dolores handed Elena a set of coveralls from a storage locker in the maintenance building. "Put these on. You'll look like part of the groundskeeping crew." As Elena changed clothes, Marcus studied the cemetery through the window. The Whitmore family mausoleum was visible in the distance, a massive stone structure that dominated the highest hill in the cemetery. It was built in the neoclassical style popular in the early 1900s, with marble columns and bronze doors that gleamed in the afternoon sunlight. "How long has your family been buried there?" Marcus asked Dolores. "Harrison Whitmore Sr. was buried in 1987. His wife followed in 1994, and their son, Judge Whitmore's older brother, who died in a car accident, was interred there in 2001. Dolores gathered maintenance tools from the building, but the structure was built much earlier than any of those deaths. Construction began in 1965, right around the time the first bodies started disappearing into the mine shafts. Elena, now dressed in groundskeeper coveralls, looked like she belonged in the cemetery environment. So the mausoleum was always intended as more than just a family burial site. That's my theory. And if I'm right, your father's evidence isn't the only thing we'll find hidden inside. They left the maintenance building and began walking across the cemetery grounds, moving casually but purposefully toward the Whitmore mausoleum. Marcus carried a toolbox and tried to look like he belonged there, though his heart was racing with the awareness that they were now completely exposed. If anyone was watching the cemetery, if the Whitmores had anticipated that someone might try to access their family shrine, the mausoleum loomed larger as they approached, its imposing architecture designed to convey power and permanence. Bronze plaques marked the burial sites of family members, but Marcus noticed that the structure was much larger than necessary for just 3 burials. Additional wings extended from the main chamber, their purpose unclear from the exterior. Dolores led them around to the back of the building, where dense evergreen landscaping provided concealment from the main cemetery grounds. A simple metal door marked "Authorized Personnel Only" was set into the marble wall, almost invisible unless someone knew exactly where to look. "This is it," Dolores said, selecting another key from her ring. "Once we go inside, we're committed. If we're discovered there, we'll be dead," Elena finished. "Just like my grandfather, my father, and Daniel." The lock clicked open, and Dolores pushed the door inward. Beyond was a corridor lined with marble, lit by hidden fixtures that cast an ethereal glow on the polished surfaces. The air inside was cool and dry, carefully climate-controlled to preserve whatever was stored within. "The main burial chamber is straight ahead," Dolores whispered. "But there are side chambers that most people don't know about." They moved deeper into the mausoleum, their footsteps muffled by thick carpeting. The main chamber housed the bronze caskets of the Whitmore family members, surrounded by elaborate floral arrangements that were changed regularly. But Marcus's attention was drawn to the side chambers Dolores had mentioned. The first room they entered was clearly an office, mahogany furniture, leather-bound books, and a massive safe that looked like it could withstand a nuclear blast. The second room contained filing cabinets and document storage that suggested this space was still actively used for business purposes. But it was the third room that made Elena gasp in recognition. The chamber was filled with safety deposit boxes, hundreds of them arranged in floor-to-ceiling banks that covered every wall. Each box was numbered and secured with dual locks, requiring 2 keys for access. And there, in the center of the room, was box number 247, my grandfather's safety deposit box. Elena whispered, but as she approached it, Marcus noticed something else that made his blood freeze. The box was open, its contents scattered on a nearby table as if someone had been examining them recently. And standing in the shadows at the far end of the room, holding a gun with practiced ease, was Judge Harrison Whitmore himself. "Good afternoon," the judge said calmly. "I've been expecting you." Judge Harrison Whitmore stood in the shadows of his family's mausoleum like a predator who had finally cornered his prey. At 72, he retained the imposing presence that had served him well during 30 years on the bench. Tall, silver-haired, with ice-blue eyes that seemed to see straight through to a person's deepest secrets. The gun in his hand was held with the casual confidence of someone who had used it before. "Ms. Vasquez," he said, his voice carrying the same authoritative tone he used in his courtroom, "you've led us on quite a chase. Though I must admit, I'm impressed that you made it this far." Elena stood frozen beside the open safety deposit box, Her grandfather's scattered documents spread across the table like evidence at a crime scene. Marcus could see her calculating distances, looking for escape routes, but they were trapped in a windowless room deep inside a marble fortress. "Judge Whitmore," Dolores said, stepping slightly forward. "I should have known you'd be watching." "The mausoleum." "Dolores, my dear woman, you've been cleaning my offices for decades. Did you really think I was unaware of your extracurricular activities?" The judge's smile was cold and paternal. "I've known about your little network of concerned citizens for years. In fact, it's been quite useful having someone keep track of potential troublemakers in our community." Marcus felt the pieces clicking into place with sickening clarity. "You've been using Dolores as an unwitting spy." "Not unwitting, Mr. Caldwell. Dolores has been reporting to me about suspicious activities and questions from outsiders for the past 15 years. Haven't you, Dolores?" The elderly woman's face had gone pale, but she met the judge's gaze steadily. "I thought I was protecting the community. You told me that keeping track of potential threats was essential for maintaining law and order, and it has been. Your reports about Elena's father's activities allowed us to intervene before he could cause significant damage to our operations." Judge Whitmore gestured toward the scattered documents. "Though I must say, Ricardo Vasquez was more thorough than we anticipated. It took us quite some time to locate all of his hidden evidence caches." Elena's hands trembled as she looked at the documents from her grandfather's safety deposit box. "You found them. You found everything my father hid." "Not everything, apparently. Your father was remarkably creative in his choice of hiding places." The judge moved closer to the table, his gun never wavering. "The mausoleum was your fiancé was exceptionally thorough. His investigation into our interstate operations was quite comprehensive." Judge Whitmore picked up one of the documents from the table, a photograph Marcus recognized as one of Elena's grandfather's original images. Mr. Reeves had managed to connect our Meadowbrook operation with similar networks in 11 other communities. He was dangerously close to exposing the entire Western Division. "Western Division?" Marcus asked. "Mr. Caldwell, you've stumbled into something far more significant than small-town corruption. The Whitmore family has been part of a carefully structured criminal organization for over 60 years. We handle money laundering, logistics coordination, and personnel management for a network that extends from Canada to Mexico." The judge moved to a filing cabinet and withdrew a thick folder. "Would you like to see the scope of our operations? The legitimate businesses, the political connections, the law enforcement partnerships? It's really quite impressive." Elena stepped away from the table, positioning herself between Marcus and the judge. "You're proud of it. Proud of the murders, the trafficking, the decades of corruption. I'm proud of building something lasting. Something that has provided stability and prosperity for our community for 3 generations. Judge Whitmore's expression grew stern. "Do you know what Meadowbrook Valley was like before my family brought order to this region? Poverty, unemployment, young people fleeing to the cities because there were no opportunities here. So you justified murder as economic development? I justified doing whatever was necessary to ensure our community's survival." The judge opened the folder, revealing organizational charts that looked like they belonged to a multinational corporation. The Whitmore Network provides employment for over 3,000 people across 7 states. We've prevented the economic collapse that destroyed so many other rural communities. Marcus studied the organizational charts as the judge held them up. The complexity was staggering. Legitimate businesses interwoven with criminal enterprises, government officials at multiple levels, and transportation networks that spanned the entire western United States. "The human trafficking operation," Marcus said. "How do you justify that?" "We provide transportation and placement services for people seeking new opportunities. Many of our clients are undocumented immigrants who need assistance reaching their destinations safely. Judge Whitmore's tone suggested he actually believed his own euphemisms. Others are young people from troubled backgrounds who benefit from structured employment in our partner organizations. Structured employment, Elena repeated. You mean slavery? I mean opportunity. These individuals receive housing, food, and work experience that prepares them for productive lives. The judge returned the folder to the filing cabinet. Of course, some adjustment period is necessary while they adapt to their new circumstances. The clinical way Judge Whitmore discussed human trafficking made Marcus's skin crawl. This wasn't a man who had gradually descended into corruption. This was someone who had systematically constructed a worldview that transformed monstrous crimes into business decisions. What happened to my father? Elena asked quietly. Your father refused multiple opportunities to walk away from his investigation. We offered him relocation assistance, financial compensation, even a position within our organization where his skills would be valued. Judge Whitmore shook his head sadly. Ricardo chose to continue pursuing a course of action that threatened thousands of jobs and decades of carefully constructed stability. So you killed him. We removed a threat to our community's welfare, just as we removed the threat posed by your fiancé, and just as we'll remove the threat you represent. Dolores had been silent during this exchange, but Marcus could see her slowly moving toward a position behind the judge. Her face was pale with shock and guilt, but her eyes showed a determination he'd never seen before. Judge Whitmore, Dolores said, her voice carefully controlled. I want you to know that I understand now what I've been part of, what I've helped you do to innocent people. Dolores, you've been an invaluable asset to our organization. There's no need for dramatic guilt over necessary security measures. Necessary security measures. Dolores's voice grew stronger. Is that what you called it when you had me report on Maria Santos, whose husband disappeared after asking questions about missing workers at the mine? Maria Santos received a generous settlement and relocated to Arizona, where she's living comfortably with her children. Maria Santos is buried in mine shaft number 7, along with her husband and their 16-year-old son who tried to find them. Dolores's hands were clenched into fists. I know because I cleaned the death certificates you forged, and I watched you burn the real missing person reports. Judge Whitmore's expression darkened. Dolores, you're allowing emotion to cloud your judgment. The Santos family was relocated for their own safety after they became involved with people who wanted to harm our community. Stop lying. Dolores shouted, her composure finally cracking. I've spent 40 years cleaning up your lies, filing your forged documents, and pretending I didn't understand what was happening. But I understand everything now, and I'm done being your unwitting accomplice. The judge raised his gun, pointing it directly at Dolores. I'm disappointed in you. After all these years of loyal service, I had hoped you would understand that some secrets are too important to expose. The only thing I understand is that I've helped a monster destroy dozens of families. Dolores straightened her shoulders, showing no fear despite the weapon pointed at her heart. But I won't help you destroy any more. Elena had been slowly reaching into her jacket during this confrontation, and Marcus realized she was going for something, perhaps a phone to record the judge's confessions. But Judge Whitmore noticed the movement and shifted his aim toward her. Ms. Vasquez, please keep your hands visible. I'd hate for this conversation to end prematurely. It's already over, Elena said, pulling her hand from her jacket. But instead of a phone, she held a small digital recording device. Everything you've said for the past 10 minutes has been transmitted to news organizations in Denver, Salt Lake City, and Phoenix. Judge Whitmore's face went white. That's impossible. There's no cellular reception this deep underground. There. As if you have the right equipment. Elena smiled grimly. Daniel taught me a lot about investigative techniques before you murdered him, including how to use satellite communication devices that work anywhere on Earth. Marcus could see the judge's hands beginning to shake as the implications sank in. 60 years of carefully guarded secrets had just been broadcast to the outside world. The confession of a sitting judge admitting to multiple murders and human trafficking would be front-page news within hours. "You're lying," Judge Whitmore sighed, but his voice lacked conviction. "The device is still transmitting. Every word you speak is being recorded and uploaded to secure servers in multiple locations." Elena took a step closer to the judge. "Your network is finished. Every name you mentioned, every location you referenced, every detail about your operations, it's all been documented." Judge Whitmore's composure finally cracked. The elderly man who had controlled Meadowbrook Valley for decades suddenly looked frail and desperate. "Do you have any idea what you've done? How many lives have you destroyed?" "I've exposed the truth about how many lives you destroyed." The judge's hand tightened on his gun, and Marcus could see him calculating whether killing them could still salvage the situation. But before Judge Whitmore could make a decision, the sound of footsteps echoed from the corridor outside the chamber. "Federal agents!" a voice shouted. "Judge Whitmore, this is the FBI. You're surrounded." Marcus felt a surge of relief mixed with confusion. How had federal agents found them? But as armed figures appeared in the doorway, he realized that Elena's satellite transmission had done more than just record evidence. It had included GPS coordinates and a request for immediate law enforcement assistance. Judge Whitmore lowered his gun slowly, his shoulders sagging with defeat. "This isn't over," he said quietly. "The network is larger than you can imagine. Removing one node won't stop the operation." "Maybe not," Elena replied, "but it's a start." As FBI agents moved into the chamber to secure the scene, Marcus looked around at the scattered evidence, the filing cabinets full of criminal records, and the safety deposit boxes containing decades of hidden secrets. Judge Whitmore was right about one thing. This was just the beginning, but for the first time. Since Elena had appeared beside Thunder in his pasture that morning, Marcus believed they might actually win. Outside the mausoleum, he could hear the sounds of a massive law enforcement operation beginning to unfold. The quiet town of Meadowbrook Valley was about to discover that their peaceful community had been built on a foundation of murder and corruption stretching back generations, and somewhere in those scattered documents and recorded confessions lay the evidence that would finally bring justice to all the families who had lost loved ones to the Whitmore Network's greed. The truth, as Elena had promised from the beginning, was about to stun the whole town. 3 weeks after the FBI raid on the Whitmore Mausoleum, Meadowbrook Valley looked like a town under siege. News vans lined Main Street, their satellite dishes pointing skyward like mechanical flowers seeking sunlight. Federal agents moved through the community with methodical precision, executing search warrants and conducting interviews that would ultimately reshape the entire region's understanding of its own history. Marcus stood on his front porch, watching Thunder graze peacefully in the pasture where this entire nightmare had begun. The black stallion seemed oblivious to the chaos his protective instincts had helped unleash, content to spend his days as he always had, eating grass, enjoying the mountain air, and occasionally looking toward the house as if checking on his human companions. Elena emerged from the kitchen carrying 2 cups of coffee, her appearance dramatically different from the terrified woman who had hidden beside his horse 3 weeks ago. She moved with confidence now, no longer glancing over her shoulder or starting at unexpected sounds. The federal protection detail had helped, but Marcus suspected the real change came from finally being able to stop running. "The FBI called this morning," Elena said, settling into Sarah's old rocking chair. "They've made arrests in 7 states. The human trafficking operation has been completely dismantled." "How many people were rescued?" Over 200. Some had been held for years, convinced they could never escape, or that their families would be killed if they tried. Elena's voice carried a mixture of satisfaction and lingering sadness. Daniel's research was even more comprehensive then. We realized every detail he documented has been checked out. Marcus sipped his coffee and watched a red-tailed hawk circle overhead. What about the people who were murdered? The families who never knew what happened to their loved ones? That's going to take longer. The FBI has teams excavating the mine shafts, and they're using ground-penetrating radar to search the areas marked on my grandfather's map. Elena pulled a folder from beside her chair. But they've already recovered enough remains to confirm. At least 43 murders spanning 5 decades. The folder contained photographs from the ongoing investigation, images that would have seemed impossible just a month ago. FBI forensic teams working in the depths of abandoned mine shafts, carefully documenting evidence that had been hidden in darkness for generations. Crime scene technicians cataloging personal effects that would help identify victims whose disappearances had been dismissed as people simply leaving town for better opportunities elsewhere. The Santos family, Marcus asked. Found them yesterday. Maria, Roberto, and their son Miguel, exactly where Dolores said they would be. Elena's hands trembled slightly as she turned a page in the folder. The FBI also found evidence that Maria had been pregnant when she was killed. 4 victims instead of 3. Marcus closed his eyes, feeling the weight of decades of injustice settling over him like a physical presence. Every family photo in that folder represented parents who never learned what happened to their children, siblings who spent years wondering if their loved ones were still alive somewhere, children who grew up believing they had been abandoned. How is Dolores handling all this? Better than expected. The FBI cleared her of any knowing participation in the crimes, and she's been invaluable in helping them understand the organizational structure. Elena smiled sadly. She's also been visiting the families of victims, apologizing for her unwitting role in the cover-ups. It's been hard on her, but she says it's something she needs to do. A car pulled into the driveway, and Marcus recognized the modest sedan driven by Agent Sarah Morrison, the FBI supervisor who had been coordinating the Meadowbrook investigation. She'd become a regular presence at the ranch, using it as an informal headquarters for planning the expanding operation. Agent Morrison approached the porch carrying a briefcase and wearing the expression of someone bearing significant news. At 45, she had the weathered competence of an investigator who had seen too many cases like this one, but her eyes still showed genuine outrage at what they'd uncovered in Meadowbrook Valley. Marcus, Elena, she said, climbing the porch steps. I have updates from the broader investigation that you need to hear. Elena gestured toward an empty chair. Good news or bad news? Complicated news. The Whitmore network was even larger than we initially realized. Agent Morrison opened her briefcase and pulled out a thick manila folder. Judge Whitmore's confession led us to operations in 14 states, involving over 50 businesses and 30 government officials at various levels. Marcus felt his stomach tighten. 30 government officials? Judges, sheriffs, state legislators, federal agents, customs officials, and border patrol supervisors. The network had been systematically corrupting law enforcement and judicial personnel for decades. Agent Morrison spread several organizational charts across the small porch table. What we thought was a regional money laundering operation was actually one division of a criminal enterprise that rivals some of the largest cartels in terms of scope and sophistication. Elena studied the charts with growing amazement. How much money are we talking about? Conservative estimates suggest the network processed over $2 billion in illegal revenue during the past decade alone. They were laundering money for drug cartels, arms dealers, human traffickers, and organized crime families from multiple countries. Agent Morrison pointed to a series of connected diagrams. The Meadowbrook operation was essentially the administrative headquarters for the entire Western United States division. Marcus tried to process the scale of what Agent Morrison was describing. His quiet ranching community had been the nerve center for a criminal organization that spanned continents. The scope was so vast it seemed like something from a movie rather than reality. "What happens now?" he asked. "Now we dismantle everything. Bank accounts frozen, assets seized, properties confiscated. Every business connected to the network is under federal investigation." Agent Morrison's expression grew grim. "But there's something else you need to know. The network has cells in other countries, Canada, Mexico, and several Central American nations. Some of those operations are still active." Elena leaned forward. "Are we still in danger?" "The immediate threat has been neutralized. Judge Whitmore and his key lieutenants are in federal custody, and the domestic operations have been shut down. But international organized crime networks don't simply disappear overnight." Agent Morrison met Elena's eyes directly. "You'll need to maintain security precautions for the foreseeable future." A comfortable silence settled over the porch as they absorbed this information. Marcus found himself thinking about all the ordinary moments of his life that had occurred while monstrous crimes were being planned and executed just miles from his ranch. Family dinners, conversations with neighbors, quiet evenings with Sarah. All of it happening in the shadow of an evil he'd never suspected. "There's something else," Agent Morrison said, her tone shifting to something more personal. "Elena, we've recovered additional materials that belonged to your father and grandfather. Items that weren't directly related to the criminal investigation, but that we thought you should have." She handed Elena a smaller folder containing what appeared to be personal photographs and documents. Elena opened it carefully, and Marcus could see tears beginning to form in her eyes as she examined the contents. "Family photos," Elena whispered. "Pictures of my grandparents when they first came to America, my father as a child, my parents' wedding." She held up a photograph showing a young couple standing in front of the Meadowbrook Valley Community Center. "That's a question we're still trying to answer. The economic impact alone will be devastating. Dozens of businesses were either directly involved in the criminal network or dependent on money that ultimately came from illegal sources." Agent Morrison gathered up the organizational charts. "The state is sending a team of administrators to help with the transition, and there will be federal assistance for legitimate businesses that can prove they weren't aware of the criminal connections." "And the people who were involved?" "The ones who knew what was happening but weren't directly committing crimes. That's the hardest part. There's a difference between legal culpability and moral responsibility, and every case has to be evaluated individually." Agent Morrison stood up, preparing to leave. "Some people will face criminal charges, others will lose their jobs or businesses, and many will simply have to live with the knowledge of what they allowed to happen." After Agent Morrison left, Marcus and Elena sat in silence on the porch, watching the afternoon shadows lengthen across the valley. The media circus would eventually move on to other stories. The federal investigators would complete their work and return to their regular assignments, but the people of Meadowbrook Valley would be dealing with the aftermath of this revelation for years to come. "Marcus," Elena said eventually, "I've been thinking about what comes next. For me, I mean. And the FBI has offered me a position as a consultant on similar cases. Apparently, there are other small towns across the country where they suspect organized crime has established similar networks." Elena turned the family photographs over in her hands. "I could help expose other operations like the one that killed my family." Marcus nodded slowly. He'd been expecting something like this. Elena had found her purpose in seeking justice for victims of organized crime, and she had skills and knowledge that could help other families avoid the pain hers had endured. "What about you?" she asked. "Are you planning to stay here?" It was a question Marcus had been avoiding for weeks. Meadowbrook Valley was his home, the place where he'd lived his entire life and where Sarah was buried. But it was also a community, built on a foundation of lies and murder, where his neighbors had either participated in monstrous crimes or willfully ignored evidence of their occurrence. "I don't know," he admitted. "This place holds all my memories of Sarah, but it also holds the knowledge of what really happened here. I'm not sure I can separate the two anymore." Elena smiled sadly. Maybe that's the point. Maybe the only way forward is to acknowledge both the beauty and the horror, and try to build something better from the truth. Thunder whinnied from the pasture, drawing their attention. The stallion was standing near the fence, his head raised as if he sensed something in the distance. But instead of the alertness that had marked his discovery of Elena 3 weeks ago, his posture suggested simple curiosity about the world around him. "He saved my life," Elena said, watching the horse with obvious affection. "If Thunder hadn't been standing guard over me that morning, if he hadn't drawn you to that spot at exactly the right time, you would have found another way," Marcus said with conviction. "You're stronger than you realize, Elena, strong enough to expose a criminal network that had been operating successfully for 60 years. We exposed it. All of us, you, me, Dolores, even Daniel and my father and grandfather. It took 3 generations and a lot of courage from ordinary people who decided they couldn't stay silent anymore." As the sun began to set behind the mountains, painting the sky in shades of orange and purple that Sarah had always loved, Marcus made a decision that felt both frightening and liberating. "I'm going to sell the ranch," he said quietly. Elena looked at him with surprise. "Are you sure?" "Not the land. I'll never sell the land. It's been in my family for 4 generations, and it's where Sarah is buried. But I'm going to lease it to a conservation organization and use the money to start a foundation." Marcus gestured toward the valley spread out below them. "A foundation that helps families of victims of organized crime, that supports investigators like Daniel, and that ensures stories like ours are told so they can't happen again." "That's a beautiful idea. Sarah always said this valley was too beautiful to hide ugly secrets. Maybe it's time to make sure it lives up to its potential." Thunder approached the porch, extending his muzzle toward Elena with the gentle curiosity that had marked their first meeting. She reached out to stroke his neck, and the horse nickered softly, as if offering his approval of their plans. "What will you call the foundation?" Elena asked. Marcus looked out at the peaceful valley where so much pain had been hidden for so long, then at the woman whose courage had finally brought truth to light, and finally at the horse whose protective instincts had set everything in motion. "The Thunder Valley Foundation," he said, "because sometimes it takes a storm to clear the air." As darkness settled over Meadowbrook Valley, Marcus and Elena remained on the porch, planning a future built on justice rather than secrecy, truth rather than corruption. The valley would heal, the victims would be remembered, and the next generation would inherit a community finally worthy of the natural beauty that surrounded it. And in the pasture, Thunder continued his eternal vigil, ready to protect anyone who needed his help. 6 months after the Whitmore Network's collapse, Elena Vasquez stood in the Denver FBI field office studying a wall-mounted map dotted with red pins. Each pin represented a community where agents suspected organized crime had established operations, similar to what they'd uncovered in Meadowbrook Valley. The scope was staggering, over 40 locations across 12 states, all following variations of the same template: corrupt local officials, legitimate businesses serving as fronts, and rural isolation providing cover for illegal activities. "The Billings, Montana case is ready for your review," Agent Morrison said, approaching with a thick case file. "Local sheriff's department has been reporting unusual patterns for the past 8 months. Missing persons reports that disappear from official records, unexplained wealth among certain families, and businesses showing profits that don't match their apparent customer base." Elena accepted the file, her trained eye immediately picking out details that would have seemed innocuous to most observers. After working as an FBI consultant for 6 months, she developed an instinct for recognizing the subtle signs of organized criminal infiltration. The patterns were always similar, but each network adapted to local conditions in ways that required careful analysis to detect. "What's the suspected operation?" she asked, flipping through police reports and financial records. "Combination of human trafficking and drug distribution, with money laundering through a chain of agricultural equipment dealerships." Agent Morrison pulled up photographs on her computer screen. The Carlson family has controlled local politics for 30 years, and their business interests have expanded dramatically in the past decade, despite the region's economic decline. Elena studied surveillance photos of the Carlson family members. 3 generations of ranchers who had somehow accumulated enough wealth to own property across 4 counties. The pattern was depressingly familiar. Rural families using legitimate agricultural businesses to mask criminal enterprises, exploiting the trust and isolation of small communities to operate with minimal oversight. "When do we leave for Montana?" "Tomorrow morning." "But Elena, there's something different about this case." Agent Morrison's expression grew troubled. "We've been monitoring communications between the Billings operation and networks in other states. It appears some of the surviving Whitmore associates are trying to rebuild using contacts the Meadowbrook investigation didn't uncover." Elena felt her blood chill. They'd thought the Whitmore network was completely dismantled, its leadership dead or imprisoned, its operations shut down permanently. The possibility that fragments of the organization were attempting to reconstitute themselves was a nightmare scenario she'd hoped to avoid. "Who are we talking about?" "David Whitmore. The judge's nephew who ran the bank, managed to flee the country before we could arrest him. Intelligence suggests he's been coordinating with international partners to reestablish operations in areas we haven't fully investigated." Agent Morrison brought up a series of financial transaction records. Money is moving through offshore accounts into rural banks across the Mountain West, following patterns consistent with the old Whitmore methodology. Elena stared at the transaction records, seeing her grandfather's ghost in the careful documentation of criminal money flows. The cycle was beginning again. New communities, new victims, new families who would suffer the way hers had suffered. "There's more," Agent Morrison continued. "We've intercepted communications suggesting they're specifically targeting communities where our investigations have created power vacuums. Places where the old criminal leadership has been removed, but new legitimate governance hasn't fully established itself. They're moving into the spaces we created by dismantling their operations." "Exactly. And they're being more careful this time, using lessons learned from the Meadowbrook investigation to improve their security and reduce their vulnerability to exposure." Elena closed the case file and walked to the window overlooking downtown Denver. 6 months ago, she'd thought exposing the Whitmore network would bring justice and closure. Instead, it had revealed that organized crime was like a cancer. Remove one tumor, and others metastasize to fill the void. "Agent Morrison, I need to ask you something, and I want an honest answer." "Go ahead. Are we actually making a difference? Or are we just playing an endless game of whack-a-mole while the real criminals adapt and evolve faster than we can stop them?" Agent Morrison joined Elena at the window, both women looking out at a city that seemed peaceful but undoubtedly harbored its own hidden criminal networks. "Elena, in the 6 months since Meadowbrook, we've rescued over 400 trafficking victims, seized more than $50 million in criminal assets, and sent 23 major criminals to federal prison. That's 400 families who got their loved ones back. But how many new victims have been created while we were chasing the old networks? I don't know. But I know that giving up isn't an option." Agent Morrison turned to face Elena directly. "Your family fought this fight for 3 generations. Your grandfather documented crimes for decades. Your father gave his life investigating them. And you've helped expose corruption that spans multiple states. That legacy matters. Elena's phone buzzed with an incoming text message from Marcus. She'd maintained contact with him throughout her FBI work, sharing updates on related cases and receiving news about the ongoing recovery efforts in Meadowbrook Valley. Elena, urgent news from home. Need to talk ASAP. Something's happening here that you need to know about. Marcus, I need to call Marcus, Elena said, showing Agent Morrison the message. Something's wrong in Meadowbrook. She stepped into a private office and dialed Marcus's number, her heart racing with possibilities. Had they missed something in their investigation? Were there Whitmore associates they hadn't identified? Had David Whitmore somehow managed to re-establish operations in his home territory? Elena, thank God you called. Marcus's voice was tight with concern. We have a problem. A big one. What's happening? New people have been moving into town over the past month. Buying properties, starting businesses, making connections with local officials. At first, everyone thought it was just normal economic recovery, new investment coming in to fill the void left by the Whitmore operations. Elena felt her stomach drop. But it's not a normal economic recovery. Dolores started noticing patterns. The new businesses are all cash-intensive operations, restaurants, laundromats, used car lots. The new residents are paying premium prices for properties and making large cash deposits at the remaining banks. Marcus's voice grew grim. And yesterday, she saw something that made her call me immediately. What did she see? 3 of the new business owners met with Captain Kane from the state police. The same Captain Kane whose father worked for the original Whitmore operation. Marcus paused, and Elena could hear him moving around, probably checking to ensure no one was listening. They were discussing transport schedules and processing facilities in the same euphemistic language the Whitmores used. Elena's mind raced through the implications. If David Whitmore was attempting to rebuild the network, Meadowbrook Valley would be the logical starting point. He knew the geography, the remaining infrastructure, and the local officials who might be corrupted or intimidated into cooperation. Marcus, you and Dolores need to get out of there, now, tonight. Elena, we can't just abandon the community. There are good people here who don't deserve to go through this again. And there are good people who will be killed if you try to investigate this on your own. Elena was already reaching for her jacket and car keys. I'm driving to Meadowbrook. Tonight, don't do anything until I get there. Elena, wait. There's something else. Marcus's voice dropped to a whisper. Thunder's been acting strange for the past week. Standing at the fence, staring toward the old mine entrances, agitated in ways I haven't seen since the morning I found you. Elena felt a chill run down her spine. Thunder's protective instincts had been unnaturally acute during the original crisis, almost as if the horse sensed danger that humans couldn't detect. If he was exhibiting similar behavior now. Marcus, promise me you'll stay on the ranch and avoid any contact with the new people in town until I arrive. I promise. But Elena, how did we miss this? How did David Whitmore slip through our investigation? Elena thought about Agent Morrison's words regarding the adaptability of criminal organizations, about the way they evolved and learned from each attempt to stop them. We didn't miss anything, Marcus. We just encountered something smarter than we anticipated. After ending the call, Elena found Agent Morrison coordinating with field teams preparing for the Montana operation. She quickly explained the situation. In Meadowbrook Valley, watching the agent's expression grow increasingly grave as the implications became clear. We need to redirect resources immediately, Agent Morrison said. If David Whitmore is attempting to rebuild the network in his home territory, he'll have advantages we can't match: local knowledge, remaining loyal contacts, and infrastructure we may not have fully identified. I'm driving there tonight. Not alone, you're not. This could be a trap designed specifically to lure you back to Meadowbrook. Agent Morrison was already reaching for her phone to coordinate backup. David Whitmore knows you were instrumental in exposing his family's operation. If he's rebuilding, eliminating you would be a high priority. Elena considered the possibility that Marcus's call was part of an elaborate setup, that David Whitmore had somehow compromised her allies to draw her into a vulnerable position. But the alternative, allowing a new criminal network to establish itself in a community that had already suffered so much, was unacceptable. Agent Morrison, what if we're approaching this wrong? What if instead of reacting to their moves, we got ahead of them? What do you mean? David Whitmore is rebuilding because he thinks he learned from his family's mistakes. He's being more careful, more subtle, using improved security measures. Elena pulled up the financial transaction records they'd been reviewing earlier. But he's still fundamentally following the same operational template. He still needs corrupt officials, legitimate business fronts, and rural isolation. Agent Morrison began to see where Elena was heading. You want to set a trap. I want to use his own methodology against him. Let him think he's successfully re-establishing operations in Meadowbrook, while we document everything and build an airtight case against the entire rebuilt network. Elena's voice grew more confident as the plan took shape. We know his patterns now. We know how these organizations operate. We can anticipate his moves because we've seen this playbook before. That's incredibly dangerous for everyone involved. If David Whitmore realizes he's being monitored, he'll eliminate potential witnesses without hesitation. And if we don't stop him now, he'll successfully rebuild a criminal network that will operate for another 60 years. Elena met Agent Morrison's eyes directly. How many families will suffer while we're being cautious? Agent Morrison was quiet for a long moment, weighing the risks against the potential benefits. Elena could see her calculating resources, considering backup plans, and evaluating the likelihood of success versus the catastrophic consequences of failure. We'll need a full task force, Agent Morrison finally said. Undercover agents, surveillance teams, financial investigators, and coordination with multiple agencies. The operation will require months of preparation and perfect execution. We don't have months. David Whitmore is moving now, while the community is still vulnerable and before new legitimate leadership can establish itself. Elena gathered her files and prepared to leave. Every day we delay gives him more time to establish connections and eliminate potential threats. Elena, I understand your urgency, but rushing into this could destroy any chance of success. Agent Morrison, my grandfather, spent decades documenting crimes while waiting for the right moment to act. My father spent years gathering evidence while hoping someone else would take action. They both died waiting for perfect conditions that never came. Elena's voice carried the weight of 3 generations of delayed justice. I'm not waiting anymore. As Elena drove through the Colorado mountains toward Meadowbrook Valley, she thought about the cyclical nature of the fight she'd inherited. Each generation of her family had discovered pieces of the truth, had gathered evidence and made sacrifices, but had ultimately been overwhelmed by the scope and sophistication of the criminal network they were challenging. But this time was different. This time, they understood the enemy's methods, had federal resources at their disposal, and most importantly, had learned that exposure and publicity were the only weapons capable of permanently disrupting organized crime's reliance on secrecy and intimidation. The road ahead wound through familiar mountains, leading back to the valley where her family's long battle had begun. But Elena was no longer the terrified woman who had fled through these same mountains 6 months ago. She was returning as someone who understood both the power and the limitations of organized crime. Someone who had learned that courage combined with careful planning could defeat enemies that seemed invincible. Thunder was waiting for her in Meadowbrook Valley, standing guard over another crisis that would test everything she'd learned about justice, family, and the price of fighting. For truth in a world where powerful people would kill to protect their secrets. This time, Elena was ready for whatever they discovered in the darkness. Elena arrived at Marcus's ranch just before dawn. The familiar sight of Thunder, standing alert in the pasture, both comforting and ominous. The stallion's posture was identical to that. Morning 7 months ago, when everything had begun, ears pricked forward, muscles tense, clearly sensing something wrong in his domain. But this time, Elena wasn't a frightened fugitive seeking sanctuary. She was a federal consultant with backup en route, and a plan to end the Whitmore legacy permanently. Marcus emerged from the house, carrying a thermos of coffee and wearing the grim expression of a man who'd seen too much corruption in his quiet valley. "Elena, I'm glad you're here. Things have gotten worse since we talked." "How much worse?" "Dolores disappeared 3 hours ago." Elena felt her blood turn to ice. Dolores Chun had been the key witness in the original investigation, the person whose knowledge of courthouse operations had made the federal case possible. If David Whitmore had taken her... Tell me everything. Marcus led Elena to the kitchen table, where surveillance photographs were spread across the surface. The images showed the new arrivals in Meadowbrook Valley, well-dressed men and women who looked more like urban professionals than typical rural residents. Dolores had been documenting their activities for weeks, Marcus explained. She noticed they were using the same meeting patterns as the original Whitmore network, but with better operational security. No cell phones during sensitive conversations, meetings in locations without electronic surveillance, cash transactions for everything. Elena studied the photographs, recognizing techniques she'd learned about during her FBI training. These weren't amateur criminals trying to rebuild a local operation. They were professionals implementing sophisticated counterintelligence measures. "What happened tonight?" "Dolores called me at 2 a.m. She'd been watching a late-night meeting at the old bank building and saw something that terrified her." Marcus pointed to a photograph showing figures entering the building through a rear entrance. "She said David Whitmore himself was there, along with people she recognized from the original network who were supposed to be dead or in prison." "That's impossible." "We confirmed the deaths, verified the imprisonments. Unless some of those deaths were faked and some of those prisoners were released through channels we don't know about." Marcus's voice was heavy with the implications. "Elena, what if the network is larger than even the FBI realized? What if what we exposed in Meadowbrook was just one small part of something much bigger?" Before Elena could respond, her secure phone buzzed with an encrypted message from Agent Morrison. "Urgent. Montana operation compromised. Multiple agents missing. Suspect coordinated attack across all target locations. Need immediate contact. Elena's hands shook as she typed a response. In Meadowbrook. Local contact missing. Believe David Whitmore operating with presumed dead associates. Request immediate backup." The reply came within seconds. "Backup unavailable. All federal resources compromised or committed. You're on your own until the situation clarifies. Exercise extreme caution." Elena stared at the message, understanding with terrible clarity that they had walked into a trap much larger than anyone had anticipated. The Whitmore network hadn't been destroyed. It had been reorganized, strengthened, and was now implementing a coordinated counterattack against the federal agents who had exposed them. "Marcus, we need to leave, now. What about Dolores?" "If they have her, our best chance of helping her is to stay free and coordinate a rescue with proper resources." Elena was already moving toward the door. "If we get captured too, there's no one left to expose what's really happening here." Thunder whinnied urgently from the pasture, and both Elena and Marcus turned toward the sound. 3 black SUVs were approaching on the dirt road, moving fast enough to kick up clouds of dust in the morning air. "Back door," Marcus said, grabbing a rifle from the gun cabinet. "We can reach the forest before they surround the house." But as they moved toward the rear of the house, Elena saw more vehicles approaching from that direction. They were surrounded, trapped in the same building where Elena had first learned the truth about the Whitmore network 7 months ago. The root cellar, Elena said. The tunnel system Dolores showed us. They ran toward the basement, but footsteps on the front porch told them their pursuers were already entering the house. Elena could hear voices, at least 4 different men coordinating a search pattern with military precision. Marcus opened the concealed entrance to the root cellar, just as footsteps began descending the basement stairs. They slipped through the opening and Marcus secured it behind them. But Elena knew it'd only buy them minutes. The tunnel system looked different than Elena remembered. New lighting had been installed, and fresh excavation suggested the passages had been expanded. David Whitmore hadn't just been rebuilding his family's operation, he'd been improving on it. The tunnel to the cemetery, Elena whispered. If we can reach the mausoleum, I can contact federal backup using this satellite equipment hidden there. They moved quickly through the underground passages, but Elena soon realized they weren't alone. Voices echoed from multiple directions, suggesting their pursuers knew about the tunnel system and were using it to cut off escape routes. When they reached the chamber beneath the cemetery, Elena saw Dolores Chun tied to a chair in the center of the room. The elderly woman was conscious but clearly injured, blood visible on her face and clothes. Standing behind her, with the same cold smile Elena remembered from their first encounter, was David Whitmore. "Ms. Vasquez, welcome home." David Whitmore looked younger than his 68 years, with silver hair and expensive clothes that suggested his exile had been financially comfortable. Unlike his uncle the judge, David radiated the confidence of someone who had learned from previous mistakes and adapted accordingly. "Your friend has been quite helpful in explaining how you dismantled our family's operation," David continued. "She's also provided valuable insights into federal investigative techniques that we'll be implementing to prevent future interference." Elena noticed that David wasn't alone. Behind him stood 4 men she didn't recognize, professionals with the bearing of former military or law enforcement personnel. This wasn't the improvised criminal organization she'd encountered before. This was a sophisticated operation with resources and training that matched federal capabilities. "Let her go," Elena said. "Your problem is with me, not with Dolores." "My problem, Ms. Vasquez, is with anyone who threatens the stability and prosperity of our operations." David gestured around the underground chamber. "Did you really think exposing one judge and a few local officials would end something that took 60 years to build?" Marcus stepped forward, his rifle trained on David. "It's over, Whitmore. The federal authorities know you're here." David laughed, a sound without warmth or humor. "Mr. Caldwell, the federal authorities are currently dealing with coordinated attacks on their personnel across 7 states. We've spent the past 6 months identifying every agent involved in investigating our network, and today we're eliminating them systematically." Elena felt her world collapse as the scope of David's plan became clear. The Montana operation, the investigations in other states, the apparent rebuilding in Meadowbrook, all of it had been designed to draw federal resources into positions where they could be neutralized simultaneously. "You used us as bait," she realized. "We used your predictable desire for justice against you. Every move you made, every case you consulted on, every investigation you supported. We were watching, learning, planning." David's expression grew colder. "Your family cost us billions of dollars and decades of careful work. Today, we will collect on that debt." But as David spoke, Elena noticed something he hadn't. Thunder had somehow entered the underground chamber. The stallion stood silently in the shadows behind David's men, his eyes fixed on the scene with the same protective intensity Elena remembered from their first meeting. "David," Elena said, keeping her voice steady, "before you kill us, don't. You want to know how we really brought down your network?" "I know exactly how you brought it down." Surveillance, recordings, federal coordination, media exposure. That's how we exposed it, but that's not how we brought it down. Alina smiled, understanding finally dawning. We brought it down because you never understood that some things can't be corrupted, can't be bought, can't be intimidated. David frowned, sensing something he didn't understand. Marcus, Alina said quietly, remember that morning when you found me? What really saved my life? Understanding flickered in Marcus's eyes. Thunder. Thunder stood guard over you all night. Alina nodded. And right now, Thunder is standing behind your men, David. He's been following us through the tunnels, and he's been protecting this valley from people like you for longer than you realize. David turned to look behind him, and in that moment of distraction, Thunder moved. The stallion reared up on his hind legs, his hooves striking the nearest gunman and sending the man's weapon flying. The chamber erupted in chaos as Marcus tackled. David and Alina dove toward Dolores. In the confusion that followed, Alina managed to untie Dolores and help her toward the tunnel entrance. Marcus was struggling with David, but Thunder's intervention had given them the advantage they needed. The satellite communicator, Dolores gasped as they reached safety. Hidden in the memorial wall, can reach emergency services. Alina activated the device and broadcast an urgent request for federal backup, including GPS coordinates and details about the coordinated attacks David had described. Within minutes, she received confirmation that rapid response teams were en route from multiple agencies. By the time federal agents secured the underground chamber, David Whitmore and his surviving associates were in custody, their communication equipment providing evidence of the broader conspiracy Alina had helped expose. 3 months later, Alina stood once again on Marcus's front porch, watching Thunder graze peacefully in the pasture. The Thunder Valley Foundation was operational, providing support for victims of organized crime and funding investigations into rural criminal networks. Marcus had decided to stay in Meadowbrook Valley, helping his community heal while ensuring its dark history was never forgotten. Any regrets? Marcus asked, joining Alina with 2 cups of coffee. About exposing the truth? Never. Alina smiled, thinking about the families who had finally received justice, the communities that were now free from criminal control, and the future victims who would be spared because the network had been permanently dismantled. Thunder raised his head from the grass and looked toward them, as if acknowledging their conversation. The stallion had become something of a local legend, the horse whose protective instincts had helped expose one of the largest criminal conspiracies in American history. What's next for you? Marcus asked. The FBI has offered me a permanent position heading a new task force focused on rural organized crime. Apparently, there are more communities like Meadowbrook than anyone realized. Alina watched Thunder return to his grazing, content in the knowledge that his valley was finally safe. But I think I'll start by writing a book about everything that happened here. People need to know that evil can hide anywhere, but it can also be defeated by ordinary people who refuse to stay silent. As the sun set behind the mountains, painting the sky in the colors Sarah had loved, Alina understood that her family's 3-generation fight for justice was finally complete. The Whitmore network was destroyed, its victims remembered, and its secrets exposed to the light of truth. And in the pasture, Thunder continued his eternal vigil, ready to protect anyone who needed his help. Up next, you've got 2 more standout stories right on your screen. If this one hits the mark, you won't want to pass these up. Just click and check them out. And don't forget to subscribe and turn on the notification bell so you don't miss any upload from us.